Hello, I'm Jennifer McClendon, Education Manager for Sports Field Management Association. Thank you for joining us for today's post-conference virtual education webinar series. Today's speakers are Ava Veith and Dr. David McCall. Ava Veith is currently a graduate student working on her master's degree under the supervision of Dr. McCall in turfgrass pathology and precision management. She has spent 3 years studying the impacts of field uniformity on athlete safety as both an undergraduate and graduate student. Ava is a former Division I athlete on the Virginia Tech women's soccer team, which provides a unique perspective on how field playability can impact athlete performance. Ava has presented her research to regional and national audiences, including an audience of 945 turfgrass professionals, where she received 23% of the votes, which was second place, for the People's Choice Award among 9 invited graduate students. She has also presented her research at the 2023 ASA annual meeting, where she gave a talk titled Spring Dead Spot and Winter Injury Impacts on Athletic Field Playability and Safety. She has done numerous poster presentations at field day events and other ASA meetings as well. David McCall is an associate professor of turfgrass pathologist and precision management in Virginia Tech School of Plant and Environmental Sciences. His team focuses on automated pest and abiotic stress detection using various sensors and aerial image analysis, targeted pesticide applications with GPS technologies, and other novel strategies to reduce chemical inputs without compromising efficacy. His team also focuses on the impacts of diseases and other disorders on athlete safety and field playability. David has presented multiple times to SFMA audiences and regional SFMA chapters on a variety of topics, including disease management, distribution, and mapping across athletic fields. Today, our speakers will be presenting Leveling the Playing Field, How Pests and Stresses Impact Playability. Speakers?
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Jennifer. Next time, I believe we need to send some shorter bios, so I apologize for that. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm happy to present some of the work that we've been doing, really what Ava has been doing for the last few years. I'm going to go through at the beginning and just give a little bit of background behind diseases and abiotic disorders. And then I'm going to turn things over to Ava and let her actually talk about some of the research she's been doing. So Ava, do you want to share the screen, please?
Yep. Thank you, Jennifer, for that introduction. And thank you all for coming. Looking forward to presenting some of my research today, and hopefully we can have a good presentation. All right. I think hopefully everyone can see that.
Could you just go ahead and do the share screen? I mean, there we go. All right. Yeah. So as Jennifer mentioned, what we're going to be presenting today is how pests and abiotic stresses impact field playability. And again, what I wanted to do kind of at the beginning is just talk a little bit big picture, kind of broad strokes about some of the greater impacts and kind of the way we typically go about discussing diseases. All right. Go ahead. Next slide, Ava. All right, so certainly we have a variety of different diseases. I suspect most people are already familiar with this. Everything from some minor foliar diseases to much more destructive things that can wipe out large areas fairly quickly. Basically, some of the things maybe have a lot of symptoms that may appear to be causing a lot of decline, but in many cases it may or may not be impacting playability. So we're going to go through and talk about some of those. On this slide, we have brown patch, dollar spot, spring dead spot, and red thread. These are all diseases that we commonly see on athletic fields, on golf courses, on home lawns. Sometimes they're problematic, sometimes they're not. So we'll go through and talk about that a bit more. Go ahead, Ava. All right, so generally speaking, whenever I'm giving a recertification talk or anything like that, we generally jump straight into talking about chemical control of diseases. That's usually what a lot of turfgrass professionals are looking for. Whenever somebody calls me to find out about the latest recommendations, usually it's not, okay, is this going to cause things to look bad? Is this going to impact playability? It's how do I control it? I'm not going to go into detail in a lot of those today. I do, however, want to at least kind of acknowledge this one website, Chemical Control of Turf Diseases. While I'm not going to get into the specific fungicide recommendations, I do want everybody to realize this is a free resource that's out there. It's primarily put together by the University of Kentucky, Rutgers University, and University of Wisconsin. However, they're gaining information that we're all putting out from all across the country to try to give the most up-to-date information as possible. And you can just Google that if you want to find out more. Lots of detail. Go ahead, Ava. Yeah. So right now there are a lot of new products that are out there. The only thing I wanted to show here is that what we typically run into in many cases, I think most of you all are probably aware of this. Generally speaking, those new products that come to market are usually just available to the golf audience. There are certainly some things that are available to athletic field managers, but generally speaking, our options are somewhat more limited for sports field management. Go ahead. So a big part of what we do is we talk about cultural practices, things that we can do to reduce the likelihood of diseases. We can suppress things to a point where it's no longer problematic, or in some situations reduce them to where you can make a fungicide application and you can really optimize the performance of that fungicide. All right, go ahead. We've done a lot of work over the last, really most of my career looking at a variety of cultural practices. This particular study is something we were looking at to try to suppress dollar spot using a variety of cultural practices, from rolling to fertility to the use of PGRs, to try to find ways to optimize dollar spots. We got a lot of good information, but the reality is it's not going to be eliminating the disease. And in many cases, it may not matter for the sports field managers because it really depends on whether or not these things actually impact the surface. Okay, go ahead. All right, so just a quick overview here. We've got a number of different foliar diseases that are out there that fall into two categories. Kind of what I would consider to be true foliar diseases that can cause substantial damage, and then some that are more of nuisance diseases. In this image right here, we had a rather severe outbreak of leaf spot on Lane Stadium at Virginia Tech last fall, whenever we had cloudy, overcast conditions for, it lasted for about a week or so. Conditions were just right for disease development. And rightfully so, the sports field manager there was concerned about what it was going to do to the playability and, of course, what it's going to look like on TV. So we went out, we looked at things. I could see that it was mostly foliar. However, I did recommend a fungicide application. The fungicide probably helped, but the reality is the bright sunshine and the warmer days probably helped more than anything, and this went away on its own in just a matter of days. You've got some other foliar diseases such as Pythium blight. Oh, no, you can keep it there. Pythium blight, which sometimes can cause, there we go, can sometimes cause blighting of widespread areas. Sometimes it can actually kill all the way to the ground, and then you're left with issues. Then you're left with bare ground, and it does become a safety hazard. In other situations, especially on Bermuda grass, it might blight out the leaves, but then as soon as you have more favorable conditions for growth, it recovers fairly quickly. Snow mold is another disease that I would kind of put into this category. Sometimes it can be bad. Other times, once you have the right conditions, depending on the severity of it, it can rebound very, very quickly. All right, go ahead. All right, and then the other category is just the nuisance diseases. These are probably the things that I get calls from the most, from whether it's a sports field manager, a homeowner, extension agent. These are things like powdery mildews, rusts, smuts, things like that. I would sometimes put red thread into that category. They might look bad, they might cause some alarm, but generally speaking, there's going to be no long-term impacts of those. All right. Okay, but the ones that I think are probably the most problematic from from a disease standpoint are those patch diseases. Those things where you've got the pathogen down in the root zone. And the reason those are problematic is because once that growing point, once the roots and the stems are killed, those plants are dead. That's something we run into a lot with spring dead spot. Large patches also shown here, which can be quite problematic in certain areas. And then for those managing cool season grasses, summer patch, necrotic green spot, take-all patch, those can all be quite problematic because, again, it is killing kind of down to the ground. All right. Okay, then we have a series of abiotic disorders as well. I think for the image here in the middle, once somebody's seen that, they always know what it is. That's the tiger striping from frost damage on Bermuda grass. But we've got other things too. We've got nutrient deficiencies that can cause some modeling of large areas and can cause some general decline. And then one of the big things that we run into in the transition zone is winter kill. That's certainly something that is very problematic, and Ava's going to get into that in a lot more detail. Okay. Okay, so something else we see very frequently, which again, Ava will talk about this, multiple things at the same time, whether it's a combination of diseases or if it is a disease and an abiotic disorder that's causing declines at the same time. Sometimes one is a major concern, sometimes neither are a concern, sometimes both are a concern. So go ahead. All right, so in this image, or this pair of images, both of these are large patch. Both of these are on a hybrid Bermuda grass. I think they were both on Patriot, taken both in the springtime. One of these, the one on the left, was there. It did a lot of damage. It basically was visible for probably about 6 to 8 weeks. It took a long time to recover. And as you may be able to see here, it actually thinned it out considerably to where the field was probably not as safe as the asymptomatic areas. The same disease over on the right side, large patch again on Patriot Bermuda grass. I saw this as a pathologist. Of course, I was excited. What do? I go out and mix up a trial, come back a few days later to apply it, and it was already gone. So a lot of it has to do with just the conditions and how well that plant is able to overcome. Okay. Right. Go ahead, Ava.
Yeah, it's lagging a little bit.
Oh, okay, gotcha. All right. So spring dead spot is one of the biggest issues that we are dealing with in Virginia. So several years ago, I went out and started collecting some baseline data just to try to figure out kind of what the surface characteristics are like. And as you can see in this image on the upper left, those patches are considerably sunken down, in some cases an inch and a half. So that led us to really start to question, all right, how do these things actually impact the playability? This is really where Ava comes into play. We started doing a lot of work, I guess 3 years ago. We did some in Blacksburg and then in Richmond. And then once Ava came on board, we started doing it in multiple locations around the state. All right. And this has actually, spurred a lot of what I would say a lot of excitement, especially at Virginia Tech, because we're actually doing a lot of work to try to bring in the athletes, get their perspective on things. Ava's been highlighted quite a few times, which Jennifer already mentioned during the bios. And I think it's really showing the importance of this research. And with that, I'm actually going to turn things over to you, Ava, and let you talk about your research.
All right, sounds good. Good job, Dr. McCall. So like everyone said, my name is Ava Veith. I'm a graduate student here at Virginia Tech. My research is focused on field playability and athlete safety. So I'll just get right into that. Okay. So Bermuda grass is one of the most commonly used turf species for athletic fields, like Dave mentioned earlier. However, Bermuda grass is susceptible to common diseases and other stressors, such as brown patch dollar spot, leaf spot, spring dead spot, and winter kill, which we just discussed. However, for this portion of the talk, I really want to focus on just spring dead spot and winter kill. So spring dead spot, I'm sure you all are very familiar with it already, but it's caused by the fungal pathogen Ophiosphaerella, which actually infects the turf in the fall. However, symptoms don't arise until the spring, hence the name spring dead spot. And it kind of leaves these sunken circular patches in the turfgrass canopy, as shown in this image on the left here. Again, like Dr. McCall mentioned, these patches can be like pretty substantially sunken, about inch and a half, which does raise concerns for playability and also safety as well. And then on the right is a picture of winter kill. As you can see, this is not technically a disease, it's an abiotic disorder, but it can impact large areas of the turf grass. Again, just caused by low temperature exposure during the winter time, which is very common to Bermuda grass, especially in the transition zone. And yeah, upon spring green up, a lot of the area can just appear to remain dormant when compared to the healthy areas. So before I kind of get into the meat of this, we did this as kind of like a little side project we did where we wanted to look at the relationship between winter kill distribution and estimated soil compaction. So we wanted to see if winter kill occurs more frequently in harder or compacted areas within an athletic field. So this is an image of a football field taken in May of 2023. And the gray area is highlighting all the winter kill. And then this image here on the right is the same field. However, those harder areas within the field are in that white color. So you can kind of see like areas with winter kill and the hardest areas within that field kind of overlap a little bit. So we were just interested in looking at that. This is a heat map of the same field. So each one of these like blue dots here is where we measured surface hardness. And then we used that data and extrapolated it across the whole field to make this heat map where obviously the red areas are harder and the green are softer. Again, the winter kill is shown in that gray color. So you kind of see the winter kill tends to overlap within those harder regions. And then I also wanted to point out these two areas here, which is where the coaches and players are standing and constantly kind of compacting that area, which is where we're obviously seeing a lot of winter kill as well. Okay, so to get into kind of the main discussion points here, this is a project I did for my master's a couple years ago. I think it was May 2023 as well. So research objective, we wanted to quantify the effects of spring dead spot and winter kill on field performance using various metrics. So I'll go into more detail about these individually in just a moment. But on the right are just a couple pictures of us on some of the fields that we sampled. And like Dr. McCall mentioned earlier, we did see both spring dead spot and winter kill within the same field for a lot of the fields we studied. Just with the weather we had previously during this time, we saw a lot of winter kill and spring dead spot present in just a local area. So perfect for a study like this. But okay. So experimental design was randomly sampled using matched pairs analysis. And to explain what I mean by that, is in this image on the right, we actually have a Clegg hammer, which I'll explain more in a moment, but it's just one of the metrics we used on a spring dead spot patch. And then we have a healthy area right next to it, shown with that blue flag. So that's what I mean by like just matched pairs. So for spring dead spot, we studied 20 matched pairs at 4 different locations, 4 different fields. And then we irrigated the whole field to 0.6 centimeters or a quarter inch. And then we selected an additional 20 pairs because we wanted to see if an increase in soil moisture had an effect on the data we were collecting. And then for winter kill, again, we studied 20 random points at 3 locations. And the reason I say random points and not matched pairs is because there's like this large area of winter kill, and we selected just 20 areas within, and then there'd be like a large healthy area next to it that we would select 20 healthy areas within that, if that makes sense. We did not irrigate the winter kill areas because it would have just turned into a big muddy mess. Okay, so moving on. Yeah, here are just a couple of drone images that we took. These are a couple of the fields we studied. I really just wanted to show this, just to show like how destructive both spring dead spot and winter kill can be. Again, on the right, those two fields hit pretty hard. Again, like most of the traffic you would expect is within that kind of that middle region. And then that's where we're seeing a lot of the winter kill as well. So it kind of supports what I was talking about earlier. But yeah, just to kind of give you guys a visual there. Okay, so getting into the metrics. So Clegg Hammer, like I mentioned earlier, this device measures surface hardness. So what you do is you kind of pull up on that black handle there and just release the handle, and it either connects to like an app on a phone or iPad or whatever, and it gives you a reading of how hard that surface is. So again, we compared the spring dead spot or winter kill area with a healthy area to kind of get the differences there. TDR, we use this to measure soil moisture. Same thing, symptomatic versus asymptomatic area. And shear vane, this device measures the shear strength or rotational resistance of the surface. And this device actually has like cleat studs on the bottom. So it's meant to simulate like an athlete's cleat planting and cutting and how much force it takes to basically tear up that surface. I want to say this one was like 80 pounds. So it's pretty heavy to lug around when we were collecting data. There's some pictures of me carrying it later. Okay, and then we used a flex testing device. So actually, this is a video. Hopefully, it's not lagging or anything. But this device is super cool. It's actually from Dr. Kylie Dixon from the University of Tennessee. And this device is meant to simulate an athlete's like acceleration motion. So as you can see, there's like a cleat on it. So and it kind of like stabbed into the surface, I guess, to kind of simulate that motion. But this device actually collects 4 different metrics at the same time. So vertical force, which is the hardness of the surface experienced at the ankle. Surface recoil, this one is pretty interesting to me, but it measures the reactionary movement of the surface when the force from the foot is applied to it. So it measures the distance in millimeters that foot travels back because of the energy return from the surface. So kind of like that energy restitution. Displacement is like surface stability. So how much of that surface is being displaced or tore up when that cleat is planted into it. And then lastly, the horizontal force is just the horizontal traction force that foot is getting upon contact. Okay, and then we also measured ball rebound. So this is another video. So we dropped a soccer ball 2 meters from the ground, and we just measured the ball bounce height on like both symptomatic and asymptomatic areas to see if there was a difference in that. And that kind of just brings the playability aspect as well, incorporating the ball. Okay, so moving on. Okay, so I know this table is kind of crazy, but I'll explain it. So just spring dead spot results. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to be looking at these 4 metrics that prove to be most significant. Most significant meaning differences between the healthy and symptomatic turf or spring dead spot. And I'll just go through each one individually. So shear vane results. So as you can see in this graph, the spring dead spot patches had a significantly lower shear strength than the healthy areas, both before being irrigated and after being irrigated. If you remember, we irrigated each field for spring dead spot. But again, you kind of would expect this, because if you look at the image on the left, these spring dead spot patches, this disease affects the root zone and the foliage as well. So it doesn't have that like healthy turf grass canopy to kind of provide that support against the shear vein. So it's much easier just to tear. And this does kind of create both playability and safety concerns as well. If an athlete were to like plant their cleat in a spring dead spot patch, not really thinking about it, are they more likely to slip? So what does that raise injury concerns and things like that? Okay. So flex results. This is the surface recoil metric. So as you can see, again, spring dead spot does have a higher surface recoil. So this means that more energy is being returned to the athlete upon contact with a spring dead spot patch versus a healthy area. And both of these values decrease after irrigation, which makes sense because the surface is a little bit softer, so not as much energy. But I included this like kind of highlighted region because the Flex device for this study was actually tested on 100 professional level fields. And that was used to kind of develop like standards or threshold values for like high performing fields. The fields tested in the study were not like professional level, but I think it's interesting to kind of show the comparison. Even the healthy areas have a much higher surface recoil. And this kind of like energy being returned to the player can almost help like more or support more explosive movements. However, obviously if there's too much over time, could that lead to injury? So just something to think about for that. Okay. Displacement. This kind of supports the shear vein data as well. So what we're seeing is more surface displacement with the spring dead spot patches and the healthy. Again, the spring dead spot patches don't have like that healthy root zone or canopy to kind of provide that support. So when the cleat from the flex is being planted into it, more of that surface is going to be displaced. And again, we're seeing more displacement for both healthy and spring dead spot after irrigation because that surface is a little bit softer just from all the water. Oh, and again, I did throw in the threshold values for this. So definitely way higher than high performing fields, which does make you think about just surface stability overall. Okay, ball rebound results. So obviously spring dead spot patches both before and after being irrigated had a higher ball bounce height than the healthy. So this does create kind of playability concerns, like if a ball were to bounce on a spring dead spot patch like right in front of you and it bounced a little bit higher than what you're expecting, could that throw you off a little bit? But again, this does kind of go hand in hand with the surface recoil results, like more energy is being returned to the player, is more energy being returned to that ball too, making it bounce a little bit higher. So yeah. And then now I'll get into the winner kill results. So same thing, I'm just going to be looking at these three metrics that were shown to be most significant. So again, I'll just go through each one of these individually. So surface hardness, and to me this is pretty interesting. So obviously the winner kill areas has significantly harder surface than the healthy. And I included this. This is actually the FIFA standards. Again, these are not like FIFA level fields at all, but this is like that acceptable like hardness range is 70 to 85 Gmax values is the units. As you can see, the healthy is just barely within that. And then the winner kill areas are way above it. And actually, both FIFA and the NFL classifies values over 100 as unacceptable. And the NFL actually, like, it says right in there, like, if your field is over 100 at any point, like, it needs to be reduced before play or before competition like takes place. So yeah, so this 100 range does raise concern for things like concussions or other impact injuries, or even like just overuse injuries from constantly like running on a harder surface. And again, you would expect this from winter kill because a healthy turf grass canopy kind of has a natural cushioning effect, and you definitely don't see that with those winter kill areas. So this is the shear vein results. Like I said, that's a picture of me lugging that thing around. It was pretty heavy. But same thing that we saw with spring dead spot, significantly lower shear strength than the healthy. Again, if you just look at the bottom left picture, it's kind of what you would expect. Actually, back when I played soccer, my summer league team used to train on this field, and I know I'm not supposed to be like biased, but I have personally like slipped in it. And it does kind of turn to like sand almost after a while because the unhealthy turf can't support that just constant traffic. Again, which is kind of what you would expect. And then lastly, ball rebound results. Again, similar to spring dead spot, we're seeing a significantly higher ball rebound on those winter kill areas. You know, they're much harder than healthy, don't have that cushioning effect. Again, could potentially throw off field playability as well. Okay, so to conclude here, winter kill occurs more frequently in compacted areas, often following wear patterns from heavy foot traffic. Both spring dead spot and winter kill have a lower rotational resistance than healthy turf, increasing the risk of player slippage. Both spring dead spot and winter kill have a higher ball rebound, which impacts playability. And the presence of winter kill on athletic fields presents a concern for player safety as it creates a harder surface. Okay. So now we're going to kind of transition into how stresses impact field playability. So there's been a lot of work on how fluctuations in things like surface hardness, soil moisture, thatch depth, rotational resistance, even infill depth on synthetic fields can cause field variability. But we really wanted to focus on how this variability impacts the athletes themselves. So I'll start to get into that here. Okay, so oftentimes fields are classified as either natural or synthetic. This is actually our stadium field on the left, which is obviously natural. And then this is it's actually, I took this picture after running fitness one morning on our synthetic practice field, which they just redid, I think, last summer. But a synthetic field nonetheless. So there is extensive research comparing these two field types. However, it's important to evaluate each field individually rather than just broadly grouping them as natural or synthetic. So for this study, we really wanted to kind of dive into not only like between field variability, but also within field variability. If that makes sense. So what are these sources of variability? I kind of mentioned this briefly earlier. But so for natural grass fields, you can have fluctuations in soil moisture and thatch depth across your field. Synthetic fields, infill depth can be variable. And then for both field types, surface hardness and shear strength. So obviously no field is going to have perfect uniform values across the whole field. But it is, I think, important to maintain as much consistency as possible. So our objectives for this project, like I kind of mentioned, were to quantify the impact of variability in both natural and synthetic turf surfaces on athlete safety and performance, both within each surface type and across different types. So we wanted to evaluate how variations in all those metrics I just talked about, how they can affect athlete safety and performance across different field types. And we did this by, or we kind of quantified this on the athlete using wearable technologies, which I will explain in a moment. I think, yeah. So this is actually the Stat Sports GPS vest or performance trackers. So I actually wore these for every practice and game throughout my collegiate career. And we actually have a kinesiologist that works with the team, and these are his. So it was really nice of him to let us use them. But anyway, in that picture, these are just a couple of girls who participated. There's like a little, we call them nuggets, but the actual device itself kind of sits in a pocket in your upper back, as shown in that picture. And then, these are the ankle IMUs. So usually on the team, we would only wear or use these for players who are returning from injury. However, in this study, we put them on everyone. So these measure like the impact of each step. So how much impact is the athlete getting on their lower limbs based on the surface. And again, I'll kind of go into that more in just a moment. And then we also surveyed the athletes both before and after performance of the drills to understand their perceptions of how field surfaces influence their performance. And again, I'll explain this more in just a moment. Okay, so the fields we studied for this, obviously 4 different fields. 2 of them were natural and 2 are synthetic. However, if you look, I have either low usage or high usage for each field type. What I mean by that is, I'll just go through them. The one all the way on the left, the low usage natural field, is actually our stadium field. So very nice, gets a lot of funding, routine maintenance. So that's why we classified this as low usage. And then high usage field, or high usage natural field, this just gets like a ton of usage. Doesn't really get as much funding. It's just kind of like a practice, like multi-use field. Lots of weed pressure, which I think you can even see from the drone image there a little bit. This is actually one of the fields we studied for the spring dead spot and winter kill the summer before. So it obviously recovered from that. And then the low usage synthetic field, this was just installed, I believe, last summer. But yeah, it was only like a year old, or not, sorry, 2 summers ago. It was only a year old during the time we took this data. So that's why we classified it as low usage. And then all the way on the right, the high usage field, this is over 10 years old, is open to the public every day, just gets a ton of use. And you can even see in the image, it's just kind of more like worn and faded. So I have a pretty wide variety of both field types as well as variety within each field type as well, which is what we were trying to do. Okay, so to collect data, first for surface hardness, I really put people to work for this project. I still can't believe we actually pulled everything off. But so using a Clegg hammer, so the same device for the previous project, we took 100 surface hardness measurements across each field. So as you can see in this picture, we measured out an evenly spaced 10 rows of 10 cones, and then used the Clegg hammer at each cone to get the data. And then we used this picture of Dr. McCall all the way on the right to collect GPS locations of each point, which we used to make the heat map, which I'll show right now. So here are the heat maps of all 4 fields. And this, obviously the red areas are the harder areas and the green is the softer. So if you look at the low usage natural field, obviously there's a little bit harder areas, more compaction in the goal mouths, which is pretty common. as well as like in the middle of the field. And then the high usage natural field, actually the parking lot was like, or like not just a little parking area is like right, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but right on the left edge, and then people just get out and play. That's why it's a little bit more red there. And then the low usage synthetic field, it looks like there's a lot of variability, and I think this is because it's a little bit newer and the infill is still getting kind of settled. But as you'll see later, this field was actually softer than the high usage field, which is what you would kind of expect there. So within each of these fields, we selected 2 areas, shown by these squares or rectangles. The maroon squares are a harder area within the field when compared to just the rest of that field. And then the orange boxes are a softer area within that field when compared to the rest of the field. So we've got a wide variety of fields, and then we're also looking at the variability within each field by selecting areas where a little bit harder and a little bit softer within that field. And these areas are actually where all the athletes did the drills in. And it's also where we collected additional data within each field, which I'll talk about in just a second. So yeah, so within each area, which are these boxes here, we collected 20 measurements of shear strength. This is a new shear vane from the previous study. We upgraded a little bit. And it's much easier to carry. It actually has like a little like lever with wheels on it, so it's much better. Soil moisture, same TDR, thatch depth, and then on the synthetic fields, we also did shear strength and infill depth as well. So again, 20 measurements of each of these within each of those boxes within each field. Just to kind of further quantify each field and really get as much characteristics about each field as we could. Okay. So now getting a data collection with the athletes. So we recruited 14 female athletes to participate in the study, which was crazy. Like, I still can't believe they all showed up. And we're like still friends now. So I think they had a good time. So this image on the right is a picture of them. They're not on their phones because they're bored. They're actually taking the pre-performance surveys I gave them. And as you can see, they're suited up with, oh, yeah, we got them new cleats. So that was kind of like the incentive to participate. Like, hey, if you do this, you'll get new cleats. But also because we wanted to keep everything as consistent as we could by keeping the cleats the same. And then, yep, they wore the Stat Sports vest and the ankle IMUs as well. So got them all suited up, took the surveys, and then this is just how everything looks when they got there. I just was happy to see everything coming together, I think. Okay, so now I'm just going to kind of explain they did 3 different drills within each area on each field. So I wanted to kind of explain these individually. And they did 3 reps of each drill. So they did a drop jump drill. So they kind of started by standing on this platform, and then they stepped off, and then as soon as they hit the ground, they jumped up as high as they could. So again, they did this 3 times within each area on each field. So kind of put them through a little bit of a workout. T drill. So it's a very common drill. They just sprinted and shuffled to one of the sides, shuffled back to the middle, and then backpedaled back. And then lastly, an acceleration and deceleration drill. So this was just a straight 20-meter sprint to a cone, and then they backpedaled back. And we really made sure that they performed like at maximal effort for each drill. Okay. So starting to get into some of the results here. So this is all the service hardness results for each field. As you can see, the synthetic fields were on average harder than the natural fields. as well as the high usage fields were harder than the low usage fields for each field type, which is kind of what you would expect. More usage, more compaction, a harder surface. And then obviously the harder and softer areas within each field, the harder areas are harder than the softer. So again, kind of what you would expect. So just to get into all the results we took. So again, the surface hardness, soil moisture, rotational resistance, thatch depth, just looking at the natural fields for now. So again, surface hardness, like I mentioned, the high usage field was harder than the low usage field for both of these areas. However, these values are very low, just overall. And I think it's because the soil moisture values were very high. But that's okay. We're just trying to quantify each field, and this is just kind of what it was. And then the rotational resistance values, these are actually all within like the acceptable range for FIFA. It's actually 25 to 50. And then thatch depth, the softer areas actually had a higher thatch depth, which I think kind of makes sense. However, it was interesting to me that the low usage field had a higher thatch than the high usage field. I think it's because the high usage field is actually newer than the low usage one, so maybe it just doesn't have as much time for thatch buildup. And the high usage field was also recently resprigged, so maybe that could have something to do with it. And yeah, it's kind of interesting there. Okay, so same thing, but for the synthetic fields. So again, surface hardness was overall harder than the natural fields, and the hard area, or sorry, the high usage field was overall harder than the low usage. Then if you look at infill depth, so this makes sense as well. So the high usage field, the harder field has less infill than the low usage fields, which makes sense because the infill is there to provide cushioning, which is what you would expect an overall a softer field. And then obviously the soft areas within each field had a little bit more infill than the harder areas within each field. So again, like less infill, less cushioning, maybe a little bit harder of a surface. And then rotational resistance, same thing, all within those 25 to 50 range. Again, I will say, like, rotational resistance, we did find this metric to be pretty variable, just based off field conditions. Like, I feel like so many things can influence it, like soil moisture or even infill depth, all kinds of things. Okay, so now getting into the stat sports GPS units and the results we got from those. So for these, we use them to record athlete speed, so how fast they were running for each drill. And this is very important because there is a relationship between running speed and impact force. So we measured this during the T drill and the acceleration to deceleration drill. So we really wanted to make sure there were no significant differences between fields, or that for some reason the athletes weren't running faster on one field versus the other, because if they were, that would throw off our the data collected by the ankle IMUs, since there is a relationship between running speed and impact force. So if they're running faster, then that means we would see a higher impact. But we did not find any significant differences, which is good. So then that kind of led us to be able to attribute the results we were finding from the ankle IMUs to the actual surface and not just their running speed. We also use them to look at trunk acceleration. So what I mean by this is we only recorded this during the drop jump drill. So we were looking at what their trunk is doing when they're landing from the drop jump. And we wanted to see if this trunk acceleration during this drill was different between field types, because if there's more trunk acceleration on one field, let's say, that could reflect reduced trunk stability or control during landing. And this instability can actually cause compensatory movement patterns such as increased tibial internal rotation or valgus collapse, which places more stress on the ACL. And also an unstable trunk can kind of shift the athlete's center of mass like pretty quickly, which again does create strain or increase strain on lower limbs. And actually, a part of the reason why we wanted to use female athletes in this study was because ACL tears are much more common in females than males, just due to anatomical reasons. And also, like, after working with our kinesiologist a little bit, he did a separate study, but basically looking at players who have torn their ACL in the past, how they land versus players who have never torn their ACL. And he did find there's kind of a trend that when they land, the ACL players, they kind of tend to lean back a little bit more, which does place more strain on your ACL. And things like that, which I thought was pretty interesting. However, we did not find any significant differences for this either, which honestly I wasn't really expecting, but just something I was interested to look at. Okay, so getting into the ankle IMU results, which I think is probably the most interesting. So these devices, again, those are the orange straps on their ankles. These record a metric called average intensity, which is the mean impact intensity derived from every impact propagated into both limbs, recorded in units of gravity. So another crazy table, but I'm going to explain it. So I'm going to highlight these three boxes here. So this is just looking at field type. So for the synthetic fields, for all three drills, we are seeing a higher average intensity than the natural fields. To me, this makes sense because the synthetic fields were overall harder than the natural, so we're seeing a higher impact intensity from that harder surface. And then here, the hard areas within each field for the acceleration deceleration drill, which was probably the most amount of running, again, had a significantly higher or average intensity than the soft areas. And then, again, the high usage fields for the T drill had a significantly higher average intensity than the low usage fields. And then lastly, both areas within the synthetic fields, hard and soft, had a significantly higher average intensity than both areas within the natural fields. And then the soft area within the natural field had this significantly lower average intensity than all other field types because it was also the softest. And the reason I bolded this 21.58 and this 23.51 value is because on the like ankle IMU website, they kind of classify values over 21.5 as high intensity, which I'm not really sure what that means. They don't really explain it very well, but it is interesting to me that even though the service hardness values we collected were within actually a lot of them are pretty low, but even for the synthetic fields, they were within that acceptable range. We are still seeing high intensity values. And to me, that makes me think like, okay, well, what if these fields were within that 100 G max range? They were in those unsafe conditions, then what would the average intensity be? And would that lead to injury over time? Will we see things like shin splints or other overuse injuries over time? But to me, the main thing that I kind of took away from this was the harder the field is, the harder that area is, the higher average intensity we are seeing. Okay, and I know I'm running low on time here, so I'm gonna kind of go through this last part pretty quick. So this is just the survey results. Again, just to kind of get the player perception on everything. So again, pre-performance and post-performance, we're seeing very similar. The high or the low usage natural field, they said was the highest quality, and the high usage natural field was the lowest quality, which does make sense because this field was had a lot of weed pressure, didn't really look the best. So I kind of understand why they would rate it like that. And then I'm going to go through this kind of quick to make sure we have time for questions. Again, this is showing the quality rating was rated significantly higher for the low usage natural field compared to the other fields. And then also the surface impact rating. So what this was on a scale of 1 to 10, how do they feel the surface is impacting their performance? With higher numbers being it helped their performance, and lower numbers being it negatively impacted their performance. So as you can see for this field, they rated in the 7s, which saying it does kind of help them. And then when comparing that to the high usage natural field, again, they rated this significantly lower in quality than the rest of the fields. And they also rated it low for the surface impact rating, saying it maybe negatively hurt them during drill performance. Then the synthetic fields were kind of in the middle for everything. Okay, so to wrap up really quick, surface hardness varied both within and between fields, where the synthetic fields had a higher hardness value than natural fields. And also the high usage fields showed increased hardness compared to low usage. And potential positive correlation between surface hardness and injury risk. Further research is required to kind of build on this. And then the harder surfaces were likely the cause of observed higher average intensity on the athlete's lower limbs from those ankle IMUs. Oh yeah, and also athlete feedback kind of emphasized the importance of field maintenance and improving playing conditions through the survey data. Okay, and thank you to everyone for their help in this project. It was a lot of work, and I couldn't have done it with all of them. So thank you. And this time I could take any questions. I know we're running close on time there.
I'd say if anybody has any questions, you can either actually, Jennifer, I'm not sure if they can unmute or if they just have to put it in the chat box.
Yeah, their participants are not able to unmute, but they can drop it in the Q&A box.
All right. I think everybody can probably see that Ava obviously had a massive amount of data that she's been sorting through. Certainly has been a very insightful project. So hopefully she was able to share some of the highlights of the work she's been doing.
Okay, last call for questions. We'll give that about another 10 seconds or so. Don't see any questions. Well, thank you again, Ava and David. We really appreciate the information. And just a reminder that this presentation will be available in our educational library, which is free to attendees that attended the conference and is also available for purchase for non-attendees. Thanks again to our speakers, and thank you for all of our attendees today. And I hope everybody has a great rest of their day.
All right, thanks a lot.
Thank you.